Today we're going to be solving some endgame puzzles that are going to start off easy, but they're going to progressively get harder and harder as we move on. So let's go back to the first one on the screen. Now for each one of these, I'd urge you to pause, take a minute or two, or as long as you need to solve the puzzle, and then join back into the video to see the explanation. So again, we're starting off easy. It is white to play in this position here. Let's begin. Now, in this position, it is clear that the key revolves around this a7 pawn, right? As white, they're trying to obviously come, grab this pawn, and then move out of the way and promote. Now, black is going to try to make that as difficult as possible. Now, the trick here is to be direct, meaning we're going towards the pawn, but to do so in a way that blocks our opponent's idea. So the solution is king c6, and this is a simple opposition. We are not letting this king make any progress, and we are slowly going to go ahead and pick up the pawn, and there is simply nothing that black can do. I mean, okay, they can come here, but this is no improvement. We're promoting and winning. Now, the trick, of course, of this position is not to play king to c7, which is natural, but unfortunately, it allows this king to wrap around, and this is a well-known draw. There is nothing that white can do. They might as well allow the stalemate. So again, the trick in this position is that as white, you want to go towards the pawn, but doing so in a way that blocks your opponent. Okay, on to puzzle number 2. It is white to move here again. This one has a rating of 1494, and indeed it is a little bit harder. It is not enough to simply run towards some pawns. You have to be a bit more disciplined, and as white, you have to establish a bit stronger of a plan. So pause the video, and here is the main idea of this puzzle. Now, the pawn here on c7 is clearly white's trump card. This pawn is so close to promotion, and it is therefore holding both of these pieces, the king and the bishop, very close to the pawn. Black is not free to simply wander around with both pieces because the pawn will hang. Now, this is nice, but we need to do something a bit more immediate, because what black is trying to do is walk over, take the pawn defending c7, and then take c7 itself, at which point they're going to have a very free pass to promote their own pawns. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, we need to move the bishop, which is the only piece that can help us here. The king is far too slow. So we need to move the bishop to a square where it will be safely able to control the promoting c8 square. And there is one square that jumps at you, of course, which is f5. From f5, the g4 pawn is supporting the bishop, and we are challenging the opponent's bishop, and therefore we are trying to free up this square for our own pawn. So let's see how this looks. Now, h7 is the square to reach f5. Now, the king can try to continue with its plan to take on b6, but we're going to go bishop f5, and it comes very quick. And if they take the pawn now, we're going to take the bishop, and we're going to have a winning endgame with an extra bishop. And alternatively, it is true that they can take our bishop, but the important pawn on g4 can recapture, and now this passed pawn is going to traumatize the black king. They cannot take on b6 because we promote, and it's true that they can try to hold on with king to d7, but this is just not going to suffice. We're going to simply bring away our king up the board. This king is far too passive. It's always having to guard over this pawn on c7, and we're going to be able to win very easily. Puzzle number 3 is rated 1903, and it is black to move this time. So again, pause the video, give it a shot. Here, the key, I think, to note is that the rook on e6 is very flimsy. It is only defended by a king, and the king is the worst defender. And the reason for this is that it can very easily be distracted away, right? It's such an important piece that when you attack it, or when you give a check, you're forcing it to move. And that is the key of this puzzle. So, as is very typical in tactics, and the endgame is no exception, we want to start by looking at checks, and here, the only check on the board is indeed rook to f4, and this is appealing for the reason I just mentioned. We are distracting the king away from the rook. Now, we do have to actually calculate the transformation and make sure that this works for us, but it does work, because while our king is close enough to their pawn, their king is not close enough to our pawn. And so after we capture on e6, they can try to push, but then we can stop it, or they can try to make progress towards our pawn, but then we push it. And again, we are just fast enough. And something like this, and we win very convincingly. On to puzzle number 4. It is now 2,490, so a very daunting rating. and both queens are on the board. So we also have a pretty daunting position. It seems very interesting and double-edged. It is black to move here. Pause the video, give this a shot, and let's go ahead and take a look. Now, I think what's helpful in positions where there are especially queens on the board, but also rooks, is to try to understand whether there is a way to take both of those pieces off the board. And I think especially, like I said, with queens, that is often possible through a series of checks. So first of all, let's understand whether that is a possibility, whether it even exists here. And if it is, we want to then understand whether taking both queens off of the board would help us as black or would help white. So first of all, how can we try to get both queens off the board? Now, the check on h8 allows king to f7, and it's not clear how we are making progress. Far more helpful is the check on e7. And after the king is forced to g8, we now have access to d8. So this would be the path towards forcing the queens off the board. And now we need to evaluate the resulting endgame. We have both a pawn to each of our names. Which pawn is stronger? Of course, hopefully you can see that it is the black pawn because of the activity of the black king. This white king is not fast enough to take the pawn, and it is certainly not fast enough to support and help its own pawn promote. Meanwhile, our king is fast enough to block our opponent's pawn, and although it's not necessary here, it is also very close to our own pawn to support and guide it through promotion. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that very concretely, we can simply win here. So in this position, they can try to march towards the pawn, but we simply push, and of course, they're just a little too slow, and we can promote with ease. So I don't think this is actually that difficult, especially for the rating, but I think the key here is understanding that with queens, you don't want to just give random checks, right? There's a lot of checks at black's disposal which seem tempting. What you want to be is a little bit more strategic, and you want to understand your long-term goal of trading off the queens and transforming the position very similar to the last puzzle into a winning king and pawn endgame. And we are on to puzzle number 5. This one has a rating attached to it of 2,834. It is white to move, so pause the video, take some time. Okay, let's take a look. Now we are down the exchange here. They have a rook, we have a bishop. That is not good. But what do we have at our disposal? Clearly, the g pawn on g6 and potentially on g7 is our biggest bonus here. It's our biggest asset. Okay. So I think tempting and logical is to see what happens if we push. And this is indeed the correct starting move, but we want to be precise in how we continue. Now, first of all, what is black going to do here? It is clear that their rook needs to find a way to defend over the promoting square. And luckily, and very geometrically appealing, they can't do it with b8, nor can't they do it with g3. If they come to b8, we can take on c7 and fork the rook and the king. And if they come to g3, we have a very similar story. We take again on c7 and this time skewer. Both times we win the rook and we win the game from there. So geometrically, it seems very difficult for black to get what they want. They can't actually get a rook defending the pawn. Well, okay. They can. They need to be a little bit more tricky. So rook b1 is hopefully the check that you calculated. They are trying to swing over the rook to the safe g1 square from which it does cover promotion. So we are back to the drawing board. We need to figure out what we want to do as white against this. Now, I think tempting, especially in kind of blitz or bullet time controls, is when they give a check, just attack the piece, go as quickly and as forward as you can towards the piece. But this is not good because now the rook indeed has very strong control over the g-file and our king is largely misplaced. So we want to be precise. We actually go towards the g-file. And it's true that the rook can land there, but our job as white is to make it so once the rook is on the g-file, we harass it, and we do so in such a way where it is impossible for it to stay on the g-file. That is sort of the trick of this puzzle. So king to f2. Where does the rook go? It's very difficult to find a square. All of these squares are taken by pawns or kings. This one as well. They can take the pawn, but then bishop to c3 is the key idea. And again, a very nice geometric win with bishop c3. We win the rook. So they have one square. They have to come to g6 with the rook. And how do we proceed from now? Well, we attack the rook again, a5. Okay, the rook has to find now another safe square on the g file where it can protect the promoting square. And again, they cannot take for the same bishop c3, so rook to g5 seems forced. Now, I think tempting here is to continue with a4, but unfortunately this gives the g4 square to the rook, and this is an important square to surrender, because now after king to f3, the rook can jump between g1 and g4, and there are just too many squares for the king alone to handle, and there are no tactics for this bishop to win the rook. So this is actually wrong, right? So a4 is sort of the trick to avoid here. Instead, we use the bishop. Right, we have maximized everything with the pawns and the kings. We have taken away so many squares from our opponent, and the bishop can take away the final one. They again cannot take bishop c3, and the rook is simply trapped. If they, I don't know, bring the king over, we can take the rook. They take it with whichever piece they want, and we promote. There is nothing left to analyze. Black is losing. If they give a check, king to e2, and we again promote. So again, I don't think this is actually impossible to find. What you want to be thinking, and I think a lot of these puzzles, very common among all of them, is that you want to understand where are your assets and kind of where are your disadvantages. So here, clearly the bishop versus the rook is your disadvantage. You're down an exchange, but the g-pawn is your asset. And so you want to look what happens if I just push it, right? Be as forceful as you can. And then seeing some of the geometric ideas with bishop c7 and bishop c3 was the final key in this puzzle. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this concept, let me know, and I can, very easily make more tactic videos where we progress in difficulty. Comment down below how many of these puzzles you got correct, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.